When it comes to stealth games, few series are as iconic as Metal Gear Solid. Hideo Kojima's groundbreaking franchise redefined the genre and paved the way for cinematic, narrative-driven games. While each main entry in the MGS franchise has its own unique charm, Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater is considered by many to be the best. With the upcoming remake on the horizon, I decided to play through the original for the first time in 2025. Does this 2-decade-old game still hold up today?
I'm searching and I'll melt into you. What a fear in my heart, but you're so supreme. I give my life.
MGS3 is set during the Cold War in an alternate history where we follow our protagonist Naked Snake on his mission to rescue a weapons researcher named Sokolov, who is captured in the Soviet Union. Snake must save Sokolov to prevent the Soviets from using him to make breakthrough advances in their nuclear weapons technology, which would destabilize the state of nuclear deterrence that defined the Cold War years. After a lengthy intro cutscene briefing us on our mission, we are thrown into the jungle and the game begins. On the gameplay front, MGS3 was a monumental upgrade from MGS2 back in the early 2000s. I found it fun overall, and although some of the mechanics haven't aged the best, there are a number of unique and creative systems that make the gameplay feel distinct. The introduction of the camouflage system, survival mechanics, and more stealth options made the game immediately more immersive. Crawling through the grass, using the environment to hide, and managing Snake's stamina and injuries added layers of realism that were unseen in action games back in 2004. Even 20 years later, I really liked how involved the jungle environment was considered in the design. You did not only have to pay attention to the different terrain in order to blend in yourself, but you also had to visually spot enemies who are also wearing camouflage uniforms to make themselves difficult to see in the jungle. However, that being said, some aspects of these mechanics do feel dated. Camouflaging was fun to use for the first few hours, but it got tedious. Constantly swapping outfits to match your surroundings ended up breaking the pacing of gameplay more times than I wished, and the survival mechanics, like curing wounds and eating food, sometimes felt like unnecessary busy work that drew you away from the action. Inventory management is similarly another pain point. The constant menuing to equip items, cure wounds, or eat food pulls you out of the otherwise immersive gameplay, which I hope the remake later this year addresses. On the other hand, a huge plus for me was the removal of the radar. The radar in MGS1 and MGS2 was so powerful in its accuracy and clear display of enemies' vision cones that you really didn't need to pay attention to the actual environment. This made more sense with the top-down camera view in those games, but the drawback is in how it takes away the need to actually observe details in your surroundings. The removal of the radar in MGS3 forces you to be aware of what's around you and how enemies are patrolling. Taking note of enemies, hiding spots, and exits is all up to the player's resourcefulness, which for me made the gameplay much more engaging and tactical. Like in this section, I had to survey the guards and their routes before maneuvering towards the door. A given nowadays, but back in MGS1 and MGS2, the radar provided almost perfect information. I also really enjoyed how MGS3 handled item progression. Previous games would guide the player to the next important item through codec dialogue, but here in MGS3, almost all the items are optional and found naturally throughout the maps. Again, the lack of guidance instead intrinsically motivates you to explore on your own, as you'll be needing all of the resources and tools you can find to beat the oppressive enemies. It was so rewarding to find the AK-47 on my own, which greatly enhanced my firepower. I was relieved to finally find a pistol suppressor that I was running out of. Speaking of suppressors, the suppressed tranquilizer gun is back from MGS2, but much more balanced. The suppressor has a durability meter now and will break after a number of uses. This allows for more tactical decisions and encourages using different weapons and approaches. Should I put enemies to sleep now? Can I sneak instead and save the suppressor for a harder section? The only qualm I have regarding balance is that Snake is a bit too tanky, at least on normal difficulty. He can tank bullets like a truck, which not only pulls away from the immersion but also makes running and gunning too strong of an option when stealth should be king. On one hand, the extra health makes handling alerts more manageable and dynamic. Hiding, firing back, and running are often all viable options of varying degree depending on the circumstances, but it was sometimes too easy to bulldoze guards with lethal weapons. Just look at this shotgun gameplay. That said, the enemy AI is a noticeable improvement over previous entries, reacting to noise more realistically and creating more immersive encounters. They definitely still have their goofy moments though, but their pathing and squad tactics were engaging to deal with. Wacky bosses are back as well, and they are solid for the most part. Each one has unique mechanics that play very differently from the others. For instance, with Ocelot, we are fighting in a straight up pistol duel. With the Pain, I had to manage his bees with smoke and water before I got an opening. The best fights for me though were the ones that interwove stealth gameplay in. These ones encouraged creative use of your gadgets and weapons that felt so satisfying to figure out, like using the thermal goggles to help track down this sniper boss. Next, pivotal to the stealth gameplay is the level design. The game features a variety of environments, from dense jungles to indoor laboratories, each offer unique challenges and opportunities. The jungle, where you spend most of your time, excels at leveraging the camouflage mechanic, with different terrains encouraging thoughtful movement and strategy. I particularly appreciated the increased verticality in this installment compared to earlier games, as it adds depth to the exploration and combat scenarios. The indoor sections harken back to the more mechanical layouts of Shadow Moses in MGS1 and make for a nice change of pace from the outdoors. Best of all though are the many set-piece moments that create for an addictive pacing. Bombastic cutscenes, clever boss fights, vehicle combat, and more keep you itching to see what else the game has in store. One moment I'm crawling through the grass, next I'm navigating a dark cave, now I'm disguised as a scientist, and here's me shooting down helicopters with an AA gun. No section overstays its welcome, making the game feel fresh the entire way through. Overall, I had a really enjoyable time with the gameplay, despite the few nitpicks I mentioned earlier. But what keeps people coming back to Metal Gear games though is less so the gameplay and more so the story. It certainly has its flaws, but the narrative here gripped me from start to finish. The cinematography and the world building on display here were unmatched back in the day. Hideo Kojima has developed a reputation for complicated, mind-boggling plots that range from dead serious politics to silly villains. Here in MGS3, we get a James Bond-esque spy story with the balance of nuclear deterrence at stake. We get real Cold War events mixed with Kojima's own fiction, superimposing themes of nationalism, purpose, and perspective onto our own world. Then there's Volgin, who punches people with lightning. The contrast between its goofy moments and serious moments felt jarring at times, but also made the plot feel unpredictable in a good way. I was never sure what bombastic set piece was around the corner, or what mind-bending plot twist was coming up next. The highlight of the story for me though is easily Snake's relationship with the boss, his former mentor. A good chunk of their history is left unexplained, but so much emotion and nuance were conveyed just by their facial expressions alone. The game does a great job at hinting at the boss's motivations that kept me playing. Eva too was a standout. Her position as the sexiest seductress goes in predictable but interesting directions that facilitated the different character dynamics surprisingly effectively. However, the voice acting is hit or miss. While David Hayter's voice as Snake remains iconic, some of the supporting cast, like Colonel Volgin or Ocelot, can come across as overly dramatic or even comical.
Very well. I'll explain it before I kill you.
To some extent, that's part of the charm. MGS3 isn't afraid to be goofy, and for many fans, these moments add to the game's unique personality. Despite the inconsistent acting, MGS3's story is held together by some powerful, relatable themes. Foregoing the postmodern, experimental story in MGS2, MGS3 goes for a more grounded approach that hits closer to home. Kojima stated in a tweet that a major keyword for MGS3 he had in mind was scene, and a large focus of the story is how changing geopolitical climates can shift people's relationships with one another. I think MGS3 delivers its message successfully, with deliberate character writing that illustrates the tension between the individual and the country they represent in a thoughtful way. Finally, the conclusion was satisfying and insightful, rounding out an engrossing narrative that has and likely will continue to withstand the test of time. Just like MGS2 but for completely different reasons, there isn't a story quite like this one. The setting, presentation, and themes made for an insightful action game that I won't be forgetting soon. Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater is a game that defined a generation and continues to inspire. Its blend of immersive gameplay, gripping storytelling, and bold creativity makes it obvious why it's so beloved by so many fans. While it shows its age in some areas, it's a testament to Hideo Kojima's cinematic vision and the potential video games have as a narrative medium. I had a great time with my playthrough, and regardless of the upcoming remake, the original MGS3 is still fantastic in 2025. Hey, thanks for sticking around to the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more dives into important games. See you in the next one.